for your weekly dose of freedom and peace. A peaceful man stands tall. Ladies and gentlemen, the man of peace himself, Marc J. Victor, brings to you the Attorney for Freedom show.
Welcome to the show, everybody. Hey, Joe, how are you feeling today?
You know, I'm getting there, man. I'm getting there.
He's
a little congested, but good.
He's
really
recovering. Good. And so this is the Attorney for Freedom show. I am Marc J. Victor, a criminal defense attorney. And with me is my wife, Tracy.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Tracy.
And,
Hello.
you know, I just want to kind of have a little follow-up to last week's show. Last week, we did our special 90-minute extended Attorney for Freedom show on guns.
And then you wrote a beautiful article.
Yeah, you know, we did the show because it's a, you know, something we would do anyway as a freedom show. We got to talk about guns, right? Because you know, I'm not a guy who sits around and sort of fantasizes about guns or things of that nature. I'm just not really that much of a gun guy. Guns to me are tools. They're things that you know, like you may have a screwdriver or a hammer at your house or a spatula for certain jobs. A gun is a tool that I have at our house for other jobs, and so you know, you got to talk about that because especially right now it's such a timely subject with all the craziness going on in the United States and elsewhere. In fairness, they have these kinds of tragedies all over the world. And so I was inspired to sit down and write my article, which is entitled, I Am a Peaceful AR-15 Assault Rifle Owner, which is absolutely true, by the way.
Nice.
And so I sent that around. But for the listeners of our show, I've asked my trusty good pal, Mike, who's usually on the show with us, to post that link up in the chat room. I don't know if it's going up there yet or not.
It's up there.
It's up there. Okay, so if you're interested in my ramblings on really the whole gun control issue, this is it's a 10-page article, and it took some time to whittle the thing down to 10 pages. So yeah, it's also on LouRockwell.com. For those of you who are already firmly enmeshed in the freedom crowd, you probably already know about Lou Rockwell. It's L-E-W Rockwell, ROCKWELL.com. Lou saw fit to run my article. I'm a peaceful AR-15 assault rifle owner on his website. The only thing about Lou is, and Lou's a great guy, I know him personally, he never runs my footnotes. And those of you who know about my writing know that I often put all kinds of crazy things in the footnotes, and I had to take those out to have my article run on Lou Rockwell's site. If you want to see the full footnoted article, I think that's on my law firm website, which is Attorney for Freedom, Attorney, F-O-R, freedom.com. By the way, you can always get a hold of me through my website, attorneyforfreedom.com. And those of you who listen to the show know that I'm a criminal defense lawyer. We also do personal injury, and we do cases throughout the nation. I've got cases in lots of different states right now across the nation, lots of drug cases and other various criminal law cases that we do across the nation. So you can always get a hold of me at my website, Attorney for Freedom, if you have any kind of questions or criticism. I'm absolutely happy to hear from people who have critical things to say. It doesn't bother me at all. I won't get upset with you. And this is America. People are free to disagree. So with that said, let's move on to today's show. I was sort of thinking, what kind of topic can we do about freedom? That hasn't been done a lot, but that's still an important topic. And so Tracy and I were talking about this, and what we came up with is really what I'd call the critical topic of raising pro-freedom kids. It's a really important issue because, those of us who are for freedom and we try to live our lives according to that, and freedom's probably, if somebody said to me, Mark, what's the mission of your life? I'd probably say after being a dad, that's the top mission of my life, promoting freedom, because the dad stuff's even more important than that. And I think that, just to be a good human being, it's, parenting is important. It's really important. And
didn't your professor once tell you about kids, something about the flower, or it's our job to prune them, or
yeah,
what,
you're
what
right.
did you say?
Yeah, Butler Schaefer, who was on this show, he may have been our first show. I don't even recall. He, those of you who know Butler Schaefer, his writings are all over Lou Rockwell. as well. You could go to Lou Rockwell and just put Butler Schaefer in there. There's lots and lots of articles from Butler. But he was a law professor of mine at Southwestern University in Los Angeles. And we got to talking about raising kids at one point. And, Butler kind of made the observation that you don't really raise kids. They sort of flower into the people that they are going to be. And your job as a parent is to sort of guide that and to help create the conditions to allow your kids to sort of flower into the kind of people that they're going to be. And I think that's a really good place to start. It's important to think about, in my view. By the way, Tracy and I don't hold ourselves out to be the experts in this area.
Not at all.
We're soliciting input from our audience. I want to hear from other free-minded, pro-freedom people. What kinds of things do you do for your kids to help accomplish the really important mission, I would say, not just for the kids to raise them as pro-freedom people, but for our society. I mean, it's really important. And, as I've said over and over, and when I was running for U.S. Senate here in Arizona, I said many times, it's mostly to my friends who thought, Mark, why are you getting involved in politics? I said, look, none of this stuff matters. It doesn't matter what's written down. It doesn't even really matter what the Constitution says. Yeah, I said it. It doesn't matter what the Constitution says. It's all about the hearts and minds of the people who are interpreting the Constitution, right? I mean, look, we could use the very same Constitution we have right now. If I was one of the Supreme Court justices and I could pick the other 8 Supreme Court justices, we'd be done. We wouldn't have to worry about another thing because we would interpret the Constitution in such a way as would bring about freedom. And of course, as you've seen today, the people sitting there now have interpreted the Constitution in such a way as to bring about the ever-increasing empire/police state that we have in the United States, unfortunately. And all that's been done with the blessing of the Supreme Court with their interpretation of the Constitution. So there again, it comes back to the important issue, trying to win hearts and minds. And that's why raising pro-freedom kids is so important because, the next generation is really, that's where it's at. And, as I've made the observation a few times, and this is one of my sources of optimism, if the presidential election is held only with people who are 25 and under, Ron Paul's the next president. We don't have Barack Obama. We have Ron Paul, and we have such a better outlook for freedom in our nation. So I'm very optimistic about the next generation. I think it's super important, and I think that we need to have some kind of a discussion among pro-freedom people, not just what can we do, but what do we do as parents to try to instill these sort of values, this important notion of self-ownership and freedom, and really how you treat other people, because really that's what freedom's about, right? I mean, if you have
respecting other people, that's respecting other property, respecting their views.
When you boil it all down, what is it we're really talking about? We're talking about this notion that you shouldn't coerce your neighbors, right? If your neighbors are peaceful, they have a right to live their lives however they want, as long as they're peaceful. That's really, when we talk about freedom, that's really what we're talking about. So, I'd like to hear from some people if they want to call in and, drop some, if you've got parenting gems from raising your children that you think are good little tips for other parents. I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to have you call in, and you can talk to Joe. The call-in number is 480-745-1033. So feel free to call in. Joe will answer the phone. As Joe says, don't scream at him. There's no need to yell at Joe.
Because I'm a peaceful man.
He's a peaceful guy, but sometimes it's tempting to yell at Joe. But don't yell at Joe. He won't put you on the air if you yell at him. But if you've got some parenting gems, I think that this is the time. Let's air them. Let's talk about it. Let me start with
I'm going to take the phones on now.
Yeah, all right. If we got people ready to call, let's hear what they got to say.
All right, so I've just turned them on, so people can start calling now.
All right, people can start.
Here we go.
So let me start with this. I think this is a good notion for people of freedom to think about. What is it actually that you have with your kids? I mean, you don't own your kids, right? They own themselves. So, if you kick this around a little bit, the best I've been able to come up with, and that I've heard Butler Schaefer talk about as well, you sort of own this as a parent, a right to have sort of a relationship with your kids, maybe a right to raise them. And so that's the question. What is it that you do in terms of raising them? I know one of the things Tracy and I do is we don't tell our kids what to believe. We tell them they can believe whatever they want.
Whatever they want, whatever they please, believe in anything.
Yeah, whatever they want. If they want to come home and say, hey, I got a new religion I believe in. I believe in religion X or Y or Z, or I think the world works this way. Absolutely, they are totally free to believe whatever they want to believe. Now, that doesn't mean that they're free to do whatever they want to do. They're certainly free to believe whatever they want. And it also doesn't mean they're exempt from our questioning about what they believe, right? I mean, they may come in and say, hey, I believe this or that. And I think it's perfectly appropriate for a parent to come and say, hey, that's interesting that you believe that. Well, why do you believe that? What's your basis? Let's talk about what the evidence is and how you've reasoned through the issue.
Yeah, I think it's crucial to have the understanding with your children that to have them know about critical thinking, the things that you were just saying. Question your children. Ask them why they're thinking this. Kind of get some type of basis of what they're getting it from. Are they just getting it from a friend? Oh, this is the way of things. This is how you should do things. Or are you going to think about yourself?
Yeah. I mean, reasonable minds can disagree on lots of different issues. But I think if they want to take a position, I think it's really good parenting not to just say, look, you're wrong about that. I think it's good parenting to come to the kids and say, okay, let me understand what you believe. This is what you believe. Why do you believe that? I mean, look, in a free world, right? People are free to talk to people and ask them questions about what they believe, anything. Right?
Even children.
Yeah, even children. I love it when our kids come to me and say, hey, Dad, why do you believe this? Or why do you think that? I think that's, have a conversation with them. Don't just dictate. And, while we're on that point, I think it's really important to be a good example to the kids, right? I'm not a huge fan of this, do as I say, not as I do. I think it's so much more persuasive and more effective to be a good example. Live like a free person.
And you have your kids want to be like you, not just say, oh my gosh, Dad is going to be so pissed, or, if I don't do this. You want them to do what they want to do, but be able to say, that is a good thing. I do want to do that.
And Rick from Santa Fe, New Mexico says, that sounds like a really cool and great idea, but at what age do you start directing or just leading your kids to make their own decisions, and how do you go about doing that? He has no idea how to even start to do that. He's so used to controlling and making sure what's going on, but he likes the idea of what you're saying.
It's a great question, and I've never personally been much of a fan of bright line age-derived, age-based rules. Like, for example, let me just say something. We should never have a show where I don't say something controversial, right? I mean, I don't think 18 is a good age of consent. Why? Because there are some people who are mature enough to be able to make an informed, intelligent decision about having sex before they reach the age of 18. I mean, let's face it, most people do anyways, right? And then there are other people, just because you've hit the age of 18 doesn't necessarily mean automatically you're a competent adult.
That's true.
And look at the age of 21 for drinking. I mean, that's insane to me.
How do you call yourself an adult but you can't drink?
That's ridiculous.
It is.
And so people mature. The truth is, people mature at different ages, and I think that's part of the art of parenting. There isn't a 5 or 6 or 7. I think there are age-appropriate things that you can do that start at the age of 2. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, at the age of 2...
As long as you can communicate and they can communicate back, I would say.
Yeah, I think at the age of 2 and going forward, I think you can sort of start with this concept that, you know what, the whole world doesn't revolve around you. Right?
Definitely.
You can start with that. I mean, I know a lot of other things where, and this is one of my favorite lessons. I love it when the kids say, well, that's not fair. Sometimes I agree with them. I say, you're right. That isn't fair, but that's the way it is, because life isn't always fair.
It's not.
You don't have a constitutional right to fairness in all things at all times. That's just not the case.
Well, that's kind of what I would call the socialist part of the world is.
Equality.
They want to be equal.
That's right.
Just,
Equality is not one of our goals
No.
as free people. I mean, we like people to be equal before the law, right? It should be treated equally before the law. But hey, out in the real world, I mean, the reality is not everybody is equal.
And if they were, it'd be a real problem.
I would love to be equal to some of those guys who play basketball who are 7 feet tall. I love basketball, but born with genetics that allowed me to be 5'5" isn't fair. It's just not fair. I didn't have the same opportunity.
Didn't it say a peaceful man stands tall?
You know what? A peaceful man. As a peaceful man sitting here, I just have to take a break for 1 second and just say one more time how great you look today.
Oh, thank you,
Tracy. And thank you, Mark, for bringing Tracy to sit right across
Joe,
from
you
me.
look good today too. By the way,
thank you.
Definitely.
She looks so good that it focuses attention away from me, which is a good thing. People don't notice how
you're
short
so
I
sweet.
actually am.
I have the best husband in the world, by the way.
You know what? I agree.
Awesome.
Hey, Bill from Fairbanks, Alaska says, Fairbanks, what a great place to be right now, huh? Does this mean they should be able to make decisions about medical, drugs such as cannabis, or even dropping out of school and moving out at any age?
Well, look, at the end of the day, I think that, when I always say, and I'm careful to say this in all of my writings, if you look at any of my articles, and virtually any time I'm speaking, I'm pretty careful to say competent adults. And everything we're talking about in terms of freedom and living your life however you want, that applies to competent adults. And the other side of this equation is also true. Just because you might be 75 years old or even 30 years old and not competent, you might have issues, and lots of people do, where they're not able to take care of their own affairs. Those people, they still have rights, but they're excluded from the group of people that I'm talking about when I say you got a right to live any way you want so long as it's peaceful. Now, here's how I handle those kinds of things with our kids. I say, look, I like to make them as much self-owners as possible. They're in charge of their own bodies. They're in charge of their own property, those kinds of things. But I like to say things that they live under our roof. Like, for example, you might be the owner of the video game, which is fantastic, but we're the owners of the electricity.
Yeah.
And if you, how many times have I said that, Tracy?
Oh my gosh, it's hilarious.
I mean, you could do whatever you like with your video game. That's fine. But if you would like to use our electricity, we have rules. and if you would like to follow our rules, then we will graciously allow you to use our electricity. I mean, it raises another point.
Sharing?
This notion, well, actually, I want to get to that too. But I'm thinking about this notion of entitlements. This is really important because this is one of the major problems we have in America right now. We've got adults running around out there, lots of them, millions of them, who believe they're entitled to things at the expense of their neighbor. They vote for things, they support things that would force their neighbors to subsidize their activities. They have this sort of sense of entitlement.
Look at the new fiscal change that Obama just signed.
Yeah,
I mean,
lots of examples.
High class, high income, we should pay more so we can subsidize other people.
Right. We have everybody
exactly what you're talking
at
about.
the government trough trying to feed at the expense of everyone else. But so what we do is our part to try to raise kids who don't have a sense of entitlement. We tell them they are entitled to certain things, right, Trace? They're entitled to food sufficient to keep them alive, water to hydrate them, sufficient to keep them alive.
Right.
They get shelter so the elements stay off their backs.
And this story that you're talking about right now just brings me back to young parenting that I had to deal with. And it just brings me back to that story with Ricky, our youngest son. And he was probably our, I would call, terror. Help me out here, Mark.
You put it so mildly. Terror is the nicest way you could put your 3-year-old. You could describe your 3-year-old when he showed up in our house.
Yeah, and with the other kids, we don't have the usual things that we had to deal with Ricky, our little terror.
Remember the Tasmanian devil, that little cartoon guy that spins around?
I used to have a real one.
Well, we had one.
We did too.
We had one too.
And he's the baby, and I wanted to baby him, and I did certain things, and we can't punish him. He's the baby. And I just remember what Mark said to me when he had to go to his room. I was just freaking out. I said, he doesn't need to go to his room, and blah, 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 blah. And he goes, Trace, he's fine. He's going to go to his room. He has a safe place. He has safe shelter. We'll even give him a water bottle. And, there's no sharp items in there. And that's the thing. parents are afraid to punish their kids, and just
part of parenting.
It's a part of, you got to be tough.
You're not their pal.
Yeah, you're not your pal. You're not their friend. You're there to.
You're the parent.
Yeah.
And sometimes it stinks, right? You got to be the bad guy.
And I couldn't believe it that one little thing that he said to me just really changed everything.
Yeah, because in our house, you have rights. Like I've mentioned, you have a right to food that keeps you alive, a right to water to be hydrated, and a right to shelter. Anything beyond that, anything, food that tastes good, drinks other than water, places to go, nice clothes, anything beyond that, you're not entitled to. Anything beyond that, you got to earn.
Well, Nancy from Phoenix called in, and she wants to know that.
Oh, hi,
Nancy these
from
people
Phoenix.
have questions. I like that. They're questioning, and they want to. And Nancy says, should we let them carry weapons then if we feel they're competent? Because, honestly, my 14-year-old son, Jojo, and I feel he's competent. I probably wouldn't let him carry my 9mm.
Incidentally, did you see that story, Joe, that just came out?
Here in Arizona.
Was this with the AR-15? Yeah. Some kid, I want to say was 15 years old. I hope I don't get this wrong.
14 or 15.
Maybe Mike, if he's listening to the show, can put the link up to that YouTube story. He sent it to me yesterday. 15-year-old grabs an AR-15 assault rifle, right? AR-15 assault, which of course, just goes to show you calling this thing an assault rifle is just ridiculous. I mean, look, an assault is an activity that human beings sometimes engage in. Weapons don't commit assault. People with weapons can commit an assault. But the weapon itself, maybe we should call this the AR-15 defensive self-defense rifle, right? Because that's what this was. In this case, a 15-year-old grabbed an AR-15 self-defense rifle and used it to shoot bad guys who broke into his house. He defended, I think, his brother and his sister. And used it for an absolutely great purpose.
So I'm going to have to jump in here and say to Nancy, you know what I think about the children, your children, my children, Mark's children carrying weapons? I certainly think they should be educated with weapons in every way, shape, and form if ever need be. And if you want to take your kids out hunting and you feel like they should carry a weapon at that time and they're trained, so be it. That's how I feel.
I think a lot of these issues come down to the same question, which is this person of underage, is this person really competent for these things? And that's very, very hard sort of to make a general rule throughout all of society that once you hit this age, you are now competent to carry a firearm. Because like so many things, some people are and some people aren't. And so, at the end of the day, what I'd like to see is people with the proper training, who have the competency, who have the mature attitude to understand firearms law, what self-defense is, what deadly force is. When you've reached that point, and I certainly don't have a bright line that says on this day somebody is competent. To me, if they're under 18 and you're the parent, you need to make a judgment about that.
Well, take example. This is a great example, Mark. Our oldest son just got his permit to drive, and Mark has made it a point that just because when you turn 16 doesn't mean you get to just go and get your driver's license. You have to go do certain things, go to driving school, go to dad's school. And when we think he's competent enough to be on the road with other people, other children on the road, because cars are very dangerous. And I would feel terrible if we just sent Brandon out into the world not knowing the safeties. Same with a gun or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's another really important freedom point here, which is the government isn't the end of the analysis.
Absolutely not.
The government isn't the end of the standard. The government maybe sets a minimum threshold, and what we've said to Brandon is once you meet the government's minimum threshold, right, once you've gotten your permit and you get your driver's license, we've also put an additional requirement. You have to get yourself into a driving school and then produce a certificate that you've passed the driving school. Once you have accomplished that, now the government has said you can drive. We haven't said that yet.
No.
And our rules supersede those of the government. We put a higher level, a higher standard on our kids. And so Brandon then is now eligible to take my driving school.
Yeah.
He needs to satisfy me and you that we feel he's okay to get on the road once we've made that decision. But the important point is in there, it makes our kids be independent thinkers. It's not just about whatever the government says is good enough. We have a standard above the government standard. I think that should be the case in all areas. And to me, that's good parenting. You figure out the standards for your kids and don't just rely on the government to make that decision for you. We have too much of that in America, where we look towards the government for answers to things. We shouldn't be looking towards the government for answers. The government's the source of most problems. The government, who cares what their messages are? We always tell our kids, it doesn't matter what the government says. You better pay attention to what we say, because you know what we think you're entitled to.
Not true.
Hey.
And go ahead, Joe.
Farrah from Little Rock called in and wanted to know how you felt about this and how this should be handled. She said her son got expelled, he's 16 years old, from school for clipping his nails at lunch. It just so happened that he was clipping his nails with a little camping thing that probably had a little blade on it. Well, they found it, considered it a weapon, and expelled him, and now he's facing legal charges.
You know, it's an excellent question. First off, if he really is facing charges, you need to get a good lawyer out there to make sure that this craziness doesn't.
Is this something you can handle? If she wanted to know that,
I mean, maybe too small, but she might want to contact me off the air, get through my website, and I'd be happy to talk to her about it. And if it's too small, maybe we can help her find an attorney out there. I can maybe just give her some advice to get it resolved. But this actually raises a very good point, and I have a good example for this.
And she did wanted me to say. Sorry to interrupt. She wanted me to say he's absolutely competent. He's been carrying that thing since he was 7 years old.
Hasn't posed any danger to
his
anyone.
his grandpa gave it to him when he was 5.
Uh-huh.
And he's an avid fisherman and hunter, and this is
falls,
all he was doing.
This falls under the umbrella
Straight A student
of these crazy zero tolerance things where, oh my God, you brought an aspirin to school and that's not authorized, and you now are a drug dealer, and we're going to treat you with zero tolerance and all these things. I once had a case sort of along those lines, and I actually had to have a hearing, successful I might add, in front of the school board to try to get an expulsion reversed. But here's a great example that I remember hearing this when I was in law school. This was, again, from Butler Schaefer, something that happened with his daughter. She was in school one time, and this was a government school, and they had a substitute teacher that day, and the class ended early. And so her next class was on the other side of the school. The bell hadn't rung yet, and the rule was you don't leave the class until the bell rings, whatever. But in this case, it was a substitute, and the substitute didn't know the rules. So the substitute says, okay, class is over, go to the next class. So she says, okay. She gets an early jump. She goes to the other side of the school. She goes to her locker. She gets her book, and now she's going to her next class. And some rule follower teacher, to follow the rules, form over substance, stops her and says, hey, the bell hasn't rung yet. You got to get all the way back to your other class, all the way back to the other side of the school and wait for the bell to ring. And she said, that doesn't really make any sense to me. If it's okay, I'm just going to stay here and wait for my next class. The bell's about to ring. I'll just go into my next class. And this teacher was so upset that Butler Schaefer's daughter didn't just blindly follow the crazy rule that she got written up and sent it to the principal. And Butler eventually got called in, and the principal said, hey, the rules, and she didn't follow the rules, and so she's going to be expelled for a day to teach her a lesson. Well, Butler's reaction to that was he said, okay, well, that's fine. I think there's an important lesson in here, too, about not just blindly following the rules. And the rule in this case didn't make any sense, and she wasn't doing anything to hurt anybody. And she thought independently for herself. So I'm going to take it and turn this into a reward situation. So thanks for the day off. I'm going to take her to the zoo, and we're going to have ice cream, and we're going to have a big giant celebration because she thought for herself, and he turned it into an important lesson. I think it's an important lesson too, which is, don't always just blindly follow what the government says. I think our kids know, to question to question authority. They're not so enamored that somebody with a badge might show up, even a shiny badge and a gun might show up, but that doesn't mean they're right about everything. Governments sometimes do bad things. And, in my article on the Second Amendment that was put up in the chat room, I made the point at the end of that article that the real purpose of the Second Amendment, you want to really talk about what it's for?
Defend yourself against the government, right?
Our very own government. That's the real reason that the founders of our country wanted to ensure a right to keep and bear arms, because You never know. Sometimes governments do bad things. And as I pointed out, in the 20th century alone, lots of governments have done lots of bad things, like kill millions of their own disarmed after gun grabbing rules have been implemented, disarmed their own people. And so there is a real value to that. And there is a real American notion to not just blindly follow everything somebody with a badge or a position or somebody wearing some fancy uniform says. You got to think for yourself. And I think that in terms of raising good, freedom-minded kids, this doesn't mean just rebel against everything either. It means use your own brain.
Yeah, use your own brain. Think about the consequences that you're going to have to deal with.
Yeah, and, consequences is another thing. I think that people who are of freedom are just by nature more responsible, right? We take responsibility for our own actions.
Yourself, your own actions.
And we don't try to be perfect with our kids. We tell them, look, we make mistakes too. You're going to make mistakes. And I always tell the kids two things when you make a mistake, right? First, clean up your mess. Whatever mess you made, whatever mistake you made, clean up that mess. And then second, learn something from what just happened.
Or learn it from someone else's mistake.
That's even better.
That's the best.
That's the best.
Jeannie from Rochester, New York says it's so hard to be fair and teach your kids to be a free person and be all about freedom and everything. And in the system we live in, for one example is she says her kids try to make money by making crafts and selling candy at school.
Oh, and I'm sure the police are knock. You need a business license.
They're constantly getting suspended because
That's
at
crazy.
the school, the teachers are the only ones allowed to sell candy because they're subsidizing their crappy pay. And she said, that's the real rule, by the way. I kind of had to hear that 2 or 3 times from her. And she said into the caller before, the teachers at this school carried knives, nail clippers, everything else. But if a kid got found with one, done. They're expelled.
I know.
How is there that double standard?
We can't just, because we were dealing with government schools and we've ceded all of this over to the government, and government loves bright line rules, whether they make sense or not. People, anytime you meet somebody and it's just all about the rules, I think you probably can infer just from that and nothing else, you're probably dealing with a pretty anti-freedom type of a person. I hate to say that.
Yeah. We were just trying to tell the kids, we're trying to teach them about money, the value of money. So you were talking to the kids about, you guys should go make a flyer, do something, wash windows, pick up dog poop, do whatever. And then I said, Mark, maybe they shouldn't do that because there might be that one person that goes and turns them in because they didn't have a business license. Who does that?
That is just retarded. I mean, it really is.
There are people out there that are they just want to do stuff like that.
Yeah, it's true.
They have nothing better to,
They have nothing else better to do. They want to be in other people's business. All they could just say is just, no, kid.
This is why homeowners associations work. You've got these few people that want to be on the board to control everyone else. And generally, these are the kind of people that really don't have any important type of jobs. They just have, they need to try to be in power somehow, and this is how they do it.
Yeah, I hate to lump everybody together,
I do too.
But it sure does seem like there's this great urge to control your neighbor out there. And, that to me is a real anti-freedom type of a notion. We're people who are, when I say we, the pro-freedom crowd, we're live and let live, right? We're just run your operation over there, be in charge of yourself. And, that's why I think to break out another little thing that we do, Tracy and I do in our home, that I think is sort of heresy for the average person out there, is we tell our kids, you don't have to share. I know that's heresy because parents are telling their kids all the time, share, be a good sharer, this and that. We don't mandate sharing because what we try to figure out, there's a dispute. Who owns the thing that's in dispute? Is it this kid or is it that kid? Whoever owns it will make the decision about what happens. But what we like them to find out for themselves is that actually sharing can be in their mutual interest, right?
Of course.
You should share not because you have to share. You're the property owner. You're in charge of yourself. You should share because it's in your self-interest to share. You should share because, you might want to borrow someone else's toy. And if you share your toy, they're more likely to share their toy. And you get to play with both toys.
Yeah.
Doesn't that make sense? That's about cooperation. And really, at the end of the day, we libertarians are all about cooperation, right? We people of freedom, we're not saying, look, you should live on an island all by yourself and have no interaction with anybody. What we're really saying is you're in charge of you and your stuff, but use it in a way that benefits your life.
But it just all comes down to the whole libertarian philosophy, freedom mind philosophy. If you took all the things that we just talked about, it's all about respecting other people. Even in the example of our son getting on the road, it's about being responsible because you are going to be dealing with other people's lives. You need to take charge of your responsibilities of dealing with the world. Am I right?
You are. And even as a lawyer, it's not about liability.
No.
We're not what we're worried about is being responsible people who live on the planet Earth. We don't want to send our kid out there unless we're 100% satisfied he's responsible.
Jason from Monroe, Nebraska says, you might have a counseling job after this one. Should my child be forced to like my new wife? My child hates her because she's half my age and she's not his mother, but she treats him like gold.
Wow, this is a tough issue.
That's a tough one.
It
right
is
there.
a tough issue.
And Tracy and I have.
He says, I'm a libertarian, and this is one I'm having a problem with.
Yeah, Tracy and I have talked a lot about this because, some of you may know this is my second marriage, and Tracy showed up with 2 kids, and I showed up with 3 kids, and we're a blended family, and it's worked out great. And but it can be a rocky road. Now, fortunately for our situation, my kids love Tracy, and I think Tracy's kids at least like me.
Absolutely, they do. But speaking to this guy that just called in, it's not about forcing your son to like the person. It comes with respect.
Yep.
Okay, I didn't walk into our marriage, our relationship, and just say, you know what? I'm your dad's new girlfriend or whatever, and you need to just like me. I earned that.
It's a great point. I mean,
with anybody.
Yeah, and there's respect is again. There's the freedom crowd, which I think generally would fit into agree with the statement that respect is something that's earned.
Yes.
And then there's the other crowd, which is about status. Look at me. I've earned this degree. I'm in this position. I'm entitled to this kind of a respect. And so my advice would be that the new wife needs to adopt the first position, just like what Tracy said and like what Tracy did. She needs to earn the respect of the child. She needs to do things so that that doesn't always mean giving the kid everything that the kid wants. It means being a parent. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, I think kids like to know where the line is. Now, in our house, we tell them exactly where the line is, but then we also tell them we reserve the right at any moment to move the line, so don't get anywhere near our line.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a difficult issue, and I think blended families have lots of difficult,
especially in this generation, this day and age.
Yeah, they have lots of difficult issues. But what I would say is I would start from a notion that you can't force the child to love or even like your new wife. But I think if you work at it and try to foster a relationship, and time is so important.
Oh, yeah. Don't rush into things. Things will just happen. I don't know what the age of your son is, but, different kids look at things in different ages, different, right? I mean,
how many friends do we have that are in the same kind of a blended situation, and they're years behind us, and we're just sort of saying to them, give it some time.
Just give it some time.
You don't want to. Sometimes we have a situation where the woman just sort of walked right in, demanded respect, took over everything, and it really hasn't worked out so great. They're probably in the same type of situation as the caller who just called was.
Yeah.
It takes some time. You got to earn the respect. You got to. The child is. It's like you can't make somebody believe something. You can't force them to believe something. You could force them to say they believe it, but you can't really force them to believe it. You got to convince them.
No, but even for the woman, she should. Everybody's in charge of yourself, first of all.
Right.
Okay. She should think to herself, is there anything that I'm doing wrong to make him feel this way? And same with him, because it's kind of like that same thing that I was saying before. It's all about dealing with other people, earning their respect. And respect is earned, just like you just said.
Roellen from Saskatoon, Canada,
Wow.
says, you guys have really opened my eyes. I feel that I'm a libertarian in the making. What else makes me a libertarian? I've always felt like I've been in limbo. And you know what? I can really, really, really relate
I know. I'm
to
just
that.
going to say,
great
Joe.
I mean, that is
Thank
me,
you.
really. And thank you. And I know Mark can certainly open your eyes. She says, thank you so much, and I'm definitely a new loyal listener.
Yeah, I want to make a little comment on that. And then, first of all, I appreciate your comments. Thank you so much for your call, and thank you for listening. We're just flattered to hear that, and we love it. It's why we do this. But when I would say it like this, really, there's really only two groups of people out there. At the end of the day, there's really only two. There's the first group. You could call them pro-freedom or libertarians or whatever. But the first group is those who just seem to think that if there's an interaction between human beings, competent adults, it ought to be voluntary. If it's voluntary, we don't have to like it or anything. It ought to be at least legal. If it's a voluntary transaction between consenting adults, we're perfectly free to say we're against it. We think it's terrible, but it ought to be legal. And if it's a coercive interaction, if it's a forceful interaction, it ought to be illegal. And that's really all we're saying. And the rest of what we say is just sort of commentary about which box it's in, because that exhausts the possibility of interactions between humans. They're either voluntary or they're involuntary, and all we're saying is that the voluntary ones ought to be legal and the involuntary ones ought to be illegal. Now, the other group, for the people in the United States, we could call them most of the Republicans, most of the Democrats. What they're saying is, no. Some of those involuntary transactions, those are okay. Some of those ought to be perfectly legal. And they're having disputes about which transactions ought to be coercive and to what extent and all those things, for what reasons and purposes. We as free people don't really get into that discussion. We say, look, you should be in charge of yourself. Now, in a sort of non-libertarian type of a discussion, at a moral level, we could talk about anything we want. We're not going to force people to live according to what we perceive as a moral way to live. And that really is where a lot of libertarians fall off the bandwagon. You got to put them in two different universes. One is the question, what should be legal and illegal? The other, completely different question, what's moral and what's immoral? Those are different questions.
This one here is throwing me for a little bit of a loop, and I'm not even sure.
I love it already.
I'm not sure how to respond to this myself. Trina from Queens, New York, says, my daughter is very responsible. She gets A's. A competent person. I consider her really an equal almost. But since 11 years old, she's been sexually active, and I've always had to take care of this and deal with her. Now, she's 13 and has an 18-year-old boyfriend. One time at 12, she had a 42-year-old boyfriend.
12 and 42?
I mean, she wants to know, do I allow this? Does that make me not a libertarian because I'm trying to get down on her and say this ain't right?
Well, look,
that's a tough one, boy.
The only way I can relate is with my daughter.
Yeah, I couldn't hang with that.
I can't envision any set of circumstances that would allow me to conclude that my 12-year-old daughter... Did you say 42?
42 is what she said.
I would question the competency of both of them, I think, on that in a situation like that. To me, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine a 12-year-old who could have that degree of competency.
Yeah.
I just don't see it. I mean, I don't. I guess I allow for the possibility. I don't know. But I can't envision that. It's not my situation in terms of any of my life experience. But I will say, as you start getting, 17, 16, look, they're going to have sex. They're going to have sex.
At 11, though.
11 seems,
and that's just
it seems
weird.
far too young. It seems far too young for me. But, to me, I think that, and this is another difficult question, I'll say, at some point, parents are so irresponsible that that the community has a right to step in and protect the kid. At some point, there are some parents who are so irresponsible that are, like, take, for example, this situation. I'm not one of these people who thinks that spanking your kid is the worst thing on the planet. I spanked my kids. I have to say, I think I spanked each of them once.
Yeah.
After the first spanking, they said, "Wow, Daddy will spank me if I do that again." And
I remember the first time I came to your house, you even spanked me.
I was spanked lots of times.
No, but even, I mean, we deal with it now differently, or like you said, you don't have to spank because the kids are going to do what's in their best interest. So if you take something away or you do other things, they're going to realize, you know what, that's not the right thing to do, and maybe I shouldn't, because people do what's in their best interest, even the little kids.
It's an excellent point.
Right?
Kids do what's in their interest.
Yeah.
If you make it in their interest to do the bad thing, that's what they're going to do. If you reward the bad stuff, if they cry and cry and cry and cry and you give them the candy and then they stop, what you just taught them is, if I cry enough, I'll get the candy.
Yeah.
But Back to the spanking thing for a second. Look, I certainly wouldn't pass judgment on another competent adult who spanked their kids. I think it's perfectly appropriate in some situations. However, there is a point there where a spanking becomes a beating. A spanking becomes a criminal act. I can't say exactly where that point is because there are circumstances that come to bear in each case. But there is a point there, and there are parents today. I'm sure every day there's a point that a parent has crossed over that line and is now beating their kid. It's perfectly appropriate for the community to get involved and take some action to protect the kid. Where that is a function of the facts of every case. Different communities can have different standards.
Everything's
that's
different.
That's just life. I think it's important to say that, as libertarians, as people of freedom, we're not utopians. We don't think that the world is going to be perfect if everybody adopts a freedom philosophy. We don't think everybody will agree on everything. There's still going to be issues. And I think sometimes that's a criticism. People say, well, you libertarians, here's 3% of a problem we'd still have. Usually I don't even agree with that, but even if you're right, okay, is that still not a lot better than the system of endless conflict and imprisonment that we have? We lead the world in imprisonment. We're an empire. I mean, our defense spending is so unbelievably extraordinary. We spend so much money on national defense. And, we really don't have any powerful enemies out there in the world. I would say very few. I mean, if you look at the countries that spend money on defense, most of them are our allies, and we spend more than the next, I don't know how many put together. I mean, is the world we're in right now, with the government printing money out of control, we have a debased currency, we've got conflict all over the place, we got a drug war out of control, we have over 2 million people in prison, we're regulated to death from cradle to grave, the government's ever expanding. I mean, so is this the best we can do as humans? I don't think so. I think we can do better, especially if we start as parents and we start thinking about these things. And look, we don't do everything perfectly with our kids.
No.
We don't. I mean, nobody does. I mean, parenting's a difficult job.
Or if you realize you're doing something wrong, then fix it.
I had a decision like this just the other night. It was December 31st, New Year's Eve. And
Do I know about this?
You know about it. My son, Braden, who is 13 now, is at his friend's house, and their plan is to go to a party at a friend's house, and they're going to have the friend's mom, who's also at a party, pick them up after midnight and drive them around back to the friend's house where they're going to sleep. And he's telling me about this story, and he really wanted to go to the party. And I didn't want him out on the road.
Especially at that time.
On New Year's Eve after midnight. I wasn't thrilled with the notion of someone else who was just coming from a party, picking up my kid and driving my kid around. I didn't like the whole situation. I felt bad about disappointing him, and I struggled with the decision a little bit. But at the end of the day, I erred on the side of caution. I exercised my discretion as a parent to say, you know what? No, you guys can both stay at our house for the night, which is exactly what happened, and it turned out fine.
He's safe. And you made the right decision.
And sometimes it's hard as a parent. Sometimes you make the wrong decision.
I'll tell you what, this really plays in tight with Gina from Sacramento with what she had to say. She said, we raised our children since about 13 years old or so to, if they, at Christmas time or when we're celebrating, if they wanted a wine cooler or a beer at home.
Oh, this is a great...
and she said, we raised them this way, and subsequently, this is how I was raised as well. So because they were raised to have one if they wanted, they never had to go out and experiment on their own out in the, away from the house. And because of this now, she has a doctor and a lawyer. They're all libertarians.
Great.
And they're fantastic. And they said they love you. They voted for you. They said keep up the good work. And thank
Are they in Phoenix?
They are in Sacramento.
Oh.
And they said thank you, KQCK, for stepping up to the man. I didn't even know I was doing that.
Well,
Fantastic.
good for you out there, because we kind of did the same thing, Mark. Remember with Braden?
Oh, I remember. I mean,
this is a great example because this is about teaching your children.
They said, don't let the government be the person with the number to tell you what you can do.
You should be able to teach your children right from wrong, tell them that there's consequences, and there is. And we
didn't demonize
alcohol.
No,
we didn't demonize it. And the good thing about it, and this is just, and I'm going to let Mark tell the story because it's awesome before we have to end. But it's just all about the consequences, teaching your kids about things, and just letting them learn from what they just did, especially if you can do it in your own household and teach them. And then,
parents make decisions about things like this, and I don't think there's a right decision or a wrong decision. There are parents making responsible choices for their kids. And I mean, the first thing I'd point out is that, look, we have a 21-year-old drinking age here, which is in the land of the free, which is embarrassing, frankly. And around the world, you look at places.
16 is in Netherlands.
Yeah, some places are 18,
Germany,
some are 16,
18.
some are 14.
Yeah.
And in those countries, as you find that the lower drinking ages, they have fewer problems with alcohol. Why? Because they haven't demonized the thing. They haven't made it into something that kids are, oh my God, let me drink. So one day, Braden, the same one we were talking about, I don't remember how old he was. I'm going to guess maybe 8 or 9, somewhere in there. Maybe
no, he
even
was younger.
All right, maybe even
He
younger.
was younger.
All right, let's call it 6 or something. Braden came home and he had heard about this alcohol thing, and he was going to be a smart aleck about, I want some alcohol. And he was sort of enamored with this whole notion of drinking some alcohol.
And it was like, and then it was like a margarita or something that you were drinking or someone was drinking, and he was like, oh, alcohol, that looks awesome.
Ooh, I want some
looks
alcohol.
like a slushie. I want to taste it.
So I said, okay, hey, no problem. I'm not going to hide it from you. So I said, you want to try some? He said, yeah, I'd love to. So we went to our bar that we have in our house, and I took the Jack Daniels down.
Yeah, he got the worst, nastiest, grossest, hottest, burn your throat stuff.
And I poured it in the same kind of a cup where he pours juice into, right?
Yeah.
And I filled it up about halfway, just like the orange juice or whatever. And he's, hey, here you go, Braden, have fun. And he took a big swig of Jack Daniels whiskey, and boy, that was the last time he ever asked for alcohol.
He doesn't. Yeah, we have a full bar full of alcohol. Our kids,
they don't even touch it.
They know about the story. That's the thing too. Like, oh man.
Now, if you would have told him, you stay away from that, you don't even ever think about it, or I'm going to whip you.
Yeah.
Every other time you walked out of the house, they'd be up there looking at it going.
But we treat everything the same way. We talk to our kids about alcohol. We talk to our kids about marijuana. We talk to our kids about sex.
Yes.
We talk to our kids about gays. We sit down. We have classes with our kids because we don't trust the government to teach our kids. We don't delegate that. We sit down. We say we're having a family class. We sit down and we say, hey, let's talk about what it is to be gay. And you know what we tell our kids? They got a right to live their lives however they want, as long as they're not bothering anybody. Why do we care? And of course, to them, being raised in this kind of a pro-freedom type of environment, they're looking at us like we're crazy.
Yeah, like, why are we even talking about this?
Or we talked about racism one time. Remember, Trace? We said, well, they're black people and things, Mexicans and this and that, and Asians and people. And they're looking at us like, why would we think less of somebody or treat them differently because of the color of their skin? It's such a foreign thing.
It's the parenting, because I would say even back then in the 60s, 70s, it was the way of life. The parents were saying, yeah, we're going to be racist, so you're racist too. So, yeah, it's that same kind of concept that if you don't teach your kids certain things to be that way, they're going to be, they question us. Like, Why are we even talking about this? Of course, hello, duh. Can we go watch TV now? Like, this is dumb.
One of my favorite questions that I ask the kids, and I ask them this all the time, and I would encourage every parent to ask their kids this: who is in charge of you? Who's in charge of you? Sometimes when they say, well, why did you do this? Well, he told me to. Well, who's in charge of you? Who's in charge of you? And they look at me because they know what the answer is. They say, me. We force our kids to take 100% responsibility for their actions. We don't put 1% of it on somebody else.
No.
I don't care
I
don't care what somebody told you, what somebody else did, what they encouraged you to do, I don't care. You are in charge of you. You are responsible for you, and we don't budge on that. Never. And you know what? That instills a sense of self-ownership, I think, on our kids, right?
Yeah.
And that's how it ought to be. And when they grow up, I want them to have the attitude, I'm in charge of me. If I did something good, I ought to get the credit. If I did something bad, I ought to get the blame.
The blame, the consequence.
Right?
Yeah.
And, we don't pretend to be perfect. We make mistakes. And, as a parent, I think this is a hard thing to do because, your kids, they look up to you. Sometimes they think you're perfect or whatever. And I think that, if we make a mistake, it's a great teaching opportunity to go to the kids and say, you know what? I made a mistake.
Oh, yeah.
And I got to fix it. And let me show you what happens when you make a mistake, right? You fix it, and then you learn from it. What did we learn from this mistake? And we move forward.
No, but what happens right now, too, is lots of parents are trying to be friends. I mean, how many times do you hear people that come in your office and say, oh, man, we were doing this, and, we were talking about this, and I just thought it was cool because it was what... You can't be your child's friend.
Yeah, I mean...
It's good to have a relationship with your children where you can talk to them about things, not even as a friend, but just human being to human being, I would say.
Yep. The older they get, the easier that is to do, for sure.
It is, but you have to start from the beginning. You can't just,
Yeah, I totally agree.
Our first resentful person here today.
Good. Excellent.
Our first only.
Wow,
Virginia from
158.
Baltimore says, Mr. Victor, I totally disagree with your way of parenting, letting a child drink. You are the ruination of our free society. I'm a Democrat and proud of it, and I won't even get into guns with you.
Well, look, it's not really that I'm letting my child drink. I wouldn't say that that's accurate. What I'm saying is I recognize that my child someday is going to be an adult out there in the world, and I certainly don't want my child out there trying to drink, fascinated by the notion of drinking some alcohol because I've made it such a taboo, awful thing. I mean, the interesting thing is, like, when I grew up raised Jewish, and every time we went to temple on Friday night, there was wine. And the wine was free flowing. As a young kid, I used to drink wine. After every service, we had wine. In the refrigerator, there was wine. Every Friday night, we had wine. Yeah. Wine was not a big deal to me.
No, I mean, even look at Catholics. They drink wine, don't they? Like, after...
Wine?
I thought that was the blood of Christ.
Well,
you mean it's
whatever they
wine?
say it is, but there's drinking there, and it didn't kill anybody. It's not the end of the world. And
not only that... just because they drink doesn't, if they do wind up drinking, doesn't mean they're going to be irresponsible, anti-freedom type people. I mean, there's certainly lots of responsible people who drink, and we even talk to our kids about the concept of being drunk, right? Yeah. If you get drunk, you have bad judgment. You might do stupid things. I tell them stories. I come home all the time from the office, and I tell them stories about manslaughters. In fact, to the lady in, I think it was Baltimore, who didn't like my parenting style, I would encourage her, go to my law firm website, attorneyforfreedom.com. In the video section, you'll see a rather gory, bloody, nasty video of drunk drivers killing people. I put that up there as a criminal defense attorney as a deterrent to people to try to, and I lecture everybody who comes into my office on a DUI case. I lecture them about the dangers of drinking and driving. Why? Because it's an irresponsible thing to do. I don't tell them they shouldn't drink. I just tell them, if you're going to get drunk, don't drive your car.
Well, it's amazing because, Virginia, and I appreciate your listenership. Believe me, I really do. And we like all sides of every way everyone feels out there, and we want to know about that. But when I ask you, I said, well, Virginia, what age should you allow your child to drink at Christmas time or a holiday, or at least to get them taught that it's not so taboo that they want to do it? She says, never. When they're 21, whatever the law says. How can you be that cut and dry? These people, I hate to say it, Virginia, but you couldn't sit with me, Mark, or Tracy for 5 minutes in a room and argue this without running out that door, crying your ass off, because that's what you do. It just wouldn't happen. You're wrong.
Well, but look at this, though. I mean, in fairness, the law's been 21 drinking age for a long time. When I was growing up, it was 21.
It
was 21.
It was 18.
My life would be different if my parents didn't raise me to say I could have a wine cooler, because I was the type of kid, if I wanted a wine cooler and my parents said I couldn't have one, but they were cool. They're, hey, go ahead, just be home. Just do it right here and no problem.
Yeah.
I would have wanted one so bad. I'd have probably became an alcoholic. I would have probably became some kind of terrible kid. It would have changed my entire life. I know myself.
Right. But wouldn't you love to have the stats on this, Joe? I mean, when I grew up, probably when you grew up, the drinking age was 21. It's been 21 for a long time.
And that changes from place to place.
But how many people did you know under 21 who didn't drink alcohol? I mean, everybody in my school, everybody had alcohol before they were 21.
Everybody.
There wasn't one exception. Every kid I could think. Now, I remember when I turned 21, and probably a lot of listeners out there will have the same experience. When you turn 21, what happens, right?
You go get bombed and fall down the steps at Minder Binder.
Yes,
oh, wait, maybe that was just me.
Look at me, everybody. I'm 21. I'm going to go out to the bar and serve me a drink, and you can drink and get drunk. But by the time you're 22, who
They're like,
cares?
who cares?
Who
Right.
cares? It doesn't matter
It's
anymore.
the same with the underage people that try to get into the clubs. We want to go club. But then when you're 21, it's like, I don't need to go to the club anymore. I've been there, done that. Same with growing older. You just do it now, and then you say, you know what? I've been there, done that. It's the same thing.
It's exactly. I think it's a perfect example for everybody who had alcohol under 21, who doesn't really drink very much now that they're over 21. You are living proof. That merely making it taboo is an attraction to people. It's the same thing when you go to Amsterdam,
How
right?
many think anything different of that?
People think different.
You may get the 1 in 10,000 kid that doesn't think it's a taboo because he's just afraid because his parents raised him in fear. But as soon as you're told not to do it as a kid, it becomes attractive.
Yeah, in Amsterdam, you see the Americans, they come off the plane and they hustle downtown to the
Run
red
into
light.
the coffee shop.
Right
Yep.
into the coffee shop to smoke a joint. Look at picture of me smoking a joint. But after they're there a few days, it's not a big deal anymore.
You're like, oh my gosh, you just don't,
It's just not a big deal anymore. The taboo of the whole thing just goes away. And doesn't that make sense?
No, but remember when we were in Amsterdam, we were sitting down and we were asking them about, oh yeah, do you go and do you smoke? And they're like, no. I mean, we might take our family if they come in, or
It's just not a big deal.
It's not a big deal. When it's available, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, and there are some people who ask me, just diverting a second on the drug laws for a second, if we made this stuff legal, would more people smoke marijuana? Maybe, I don't know. There might be some more people who would say, now that it's legal, I'll try it, I'll use it. But I also think that there's that taboo notion of the people who go out and use it because it's illegal, that after a while, now that it's legal and it's not a big deal, that whole look at me thing is now out the window. And I bet there are fewer people on that end who actually go out and use. I mean, in the experience of drinking when you're under 21, I think is a perfect correlation to exactly what we're talking about. So, it's a parenting decision, and we as parents have made choices to not sort of lock up the alcohol, and to turn it into a big demonized taboo type thing. It's the way I was raised. It was readily available, and I couldn't care less about drinking alcohol.
Well, hey, it's right about 2 o'clock. I just want to say a few thanks to those of you who did get through on the lines. Rick from Santa Fe. We had a pretty wide audience today, as we always do. We had Rick from Santa Fe, New Mexico get through, Bill from Fairbanks, Alaska, Nancy from Phoenix, Farrah from Little Rock, Jeannie from Rochester, New York, Jason from Nebraska, Roellen from Saskatoon, Canada, Queens, and Gina from Sacramento,
And I didn't
and
get
Virginia from Baltimore.
I
wanna-
didn't get attacked by the LDS crowd
You
on today's
did not.
show, which
No,
is
not today.
the first show ever that
Maybe
that
they agree with you this time.
the Mormons left me alone on this show.
Well,
for the first time.
Salt Lake has said that
They must all
they're
agree
going to
with
leave
me.
you alone today.
I
It's
think-
like a Mark Victor holiday.
Joe, I'm going to take this as the Mormons in Salt Lake have listened to the show now. This is what, our 4th, 5th show.
Are you
Right.
a new prophet?
They've become libertarians.
That's great.
Every time they call in, I always quote the same thing, right? What do I say, Joe?
You say, please call in and let
No,
us
that's
know.
not what
No,
I
all right.
say.
I don't know what you say.
I quote Joseph Smith. Remember?
Oh, that's right.
I quote
Gotcha.
Joseph Smith, who said one of my very favorite all-time libertarian things: teach them correct principles and let them govern themselves.
Well, that's what we're saying about the kids, about the parenting.
Same thing.
That's what it all comes down to.
And all our lines are lit up again. We've got over
No,
we've got
take
over
another call.
over 30
We can
lines
go
lit up.
over.
Well,
We can go over.
and I can tell you, on defense, just letting everyone know, we are not we're not trying to rank on you or anything else out there in Utah or anywhere else where you're LDS or any religion where you don't agree with us. We want you to call in, talk to us, let us know what you think, because everyone, that's the great thing about being free. Everybody has their own opinion and their own way to live, and
Absolutely.
you don't have to do what anybody else tells you to do. So
Absolutely. And Tracy and I have adopted that philosophy in terms of our kids. Teach them correct principles. Let them govern themselves. We let them govern a little bit more as they get older and older and more mature.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, our job as parents is to teach them correct principles, reason it through with them. Don't just
Talk to them about
don't
it.
beat them over the head with it. Explain to them why it makes sense. Because, if we've done a good job raising rational kids, they'll
Right.
figure it out for themselves.
Right.
They
That's
will.
part of the human
they
experience,
do.
right?
People do what's in their best interest.
well, I sure hope I hope everyone enjoyed the show today.
Yeah.
Another great show.
It was a great show. It was very, very fun. And
The
yeah,
Attorney for Freedom
again,
show.
Mark and I, we're not here to tell you how to parent your kids or anything like that. We're just, right Right, Mark?
Yeah, we're just two parents trying to figure it out and do the best we can to raise responsible kids that are going to be turned out to the planet Earth, hopefully doing great
they're
things.
Our future, and I think it's our responsibility to at least our 5 kids to say, you know what, we did the best that we could.
What do I tell them every day before they go to school?
Oh, he tells them, do something great.
Yeah, I say
do something great.
Every once in a while, you get an opportunity to do something good, right?
It could be anything. It could be anything. It could be opening a door. It could be telling someone they look nice today. I mean, what? And this is another thing I was telling Mark. I said, we need to tell the kids to always say please and thank you, or just say hi to someone. Just by being personable, you could just earn so much respect. Just saying hi. Even our son, I'm like, when you get on the bus, say hello to your bus driver. And when you get off, tell him thank you. When you get to your class, say hello, Mr. and Mrs. whatever. Because if you don't have the people skills and the way of just talking to people and saying, showing them that you're a good human being, you could have a great degree in anything. They look at the way you deal with people.
Yeah, and I'm always so much more impressed when people are nice to people they don't expect anything from.
Hey, Mark,
right?
Do you have any future guests coming up you can tell us about offhand?
We have lots of future guests coming on. I'm just not sure who's coming on next, but I want to be mysterious about it, and we'll probably reveal.
We like surprising you guys.
Surprises.
I'm sure you didn't think we were going to talk about this today, but we got some things in the cookers.
Yeah, did President Clinton accept our invitation to get on the show? I don't know. We're
he
still
didn't get
working
back
on
yet,
that one.
Gotcha. We'll keep that under our hat there.
All
I
right,
want to
Joe.
thank everyone for listening to the Attorney for Freedom show with Mark J. Victor, myself, and Tracy today. Thanks for listening to KQCK Radio, and go ahead, Mark.
Good stuff or bad stuff, send it to attorneyforfreedom.com. Happy to hear criticism, comments, anything you got to say. Bring it on.
All right, we're out for now.
Bye.
Freedom is the answer. What's the question?